Oh, it says we're live.
Says we're
Checking
live.
the checking this to make sure it's coming through okay. Yep, we're live.
Great.
So yeah, great to have you here, Rob, and thank you everyone. As you're watching this, this series is on creating great relationships in business, and one of my favorite guests actually, Rob Schwartz. Rob was one of my first coaches, and you made some of the greatest difference, Rob, in terms of helping me see my own value and that what I do makes a difference. And so I think today's talk on how to help others see the own difference that they make in others' lives, and how to make those initial connections, and that they do provide value, that they can be a peer with others. I'm excited. I think this is going to be fun. So
Great.
Rob, I'll let you introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are.
Great. So I'm a coach and a trainer. I'm a trainer in NLP. I work at the NLP Center of New York with Stephen Leeds and Rachel Hott. And I also do a lot of facilitation in companies and, work with teams. And then mostly I just have a coaching practice where I work one-on-one with people. And I think we met both, you were in the NLP classes, and then I was doing a class in sales and a coach accelerator, and you were in that, I
Yeah,
remember.
yeah.
So that was a blast. Yeah.
That's amazing. And yeah, I love Stephen and Rachel and the NLP Center in New York, and you're an amazing facilitator there. And yeah, that's how we originally connected, and really got into more coaching. And so that's been amazing. And just so people know, where can they find you? And of course, I'll put any links in the comments after this.
Yeah, so we'll have a link to my website and to my YouTube channel, and you can pretty much hit me on my site or through Facebook. It'll be linked on Facebook, so feel free to DM me.
Cool,
Yeah.
awesome. So with the premise of this, I'm thinking this is really for people who, not always starting out, but I think it's really helpful when starting out, when people are trying to make these connections. They want to build their business, their practice, and they're really wanting to create paying clients. And obviously, it's not something where it's just like, hey, this is what I do, pay me. Like, relationships are a practice. And so
Mhm.
you're someone that really exemplifies, I think, creating powerful relationships. And you've worked with both individuals, you've worked with companies. If you're speaking to someone that's just starting out, um, or this methodology is new to them, and maybe social media isn't like their thing, but people are. How did you start? How would you share that they start?
Well, I would say there are a few things that I guess we can target a couple of themes. I
Yeah,
think the first theme is connecting with people and sort of how you're connecting with people. So I think that's really key. So that's one thread. The second thread is what you mentioned in terms of beginning to get a sense of the value that you do contribute to a client or that you can
mhm,
contribute,
yeah,
because that's an area where people can get stuck for a long time. And it's not like you have to be like, I'm the best coach or something like that. But if you don't have a sense that you're giving value, you won't feel congruent about offering it.
right.
And so that doesn't work. And and definitely it's good to have a way of talking to people so that they might be interested in hearing more or taking the conversation further. I know in my experience, for a long time, that conversation was very muddy, and I was kind of like, yeah, I'm a coach, and I wasn't really coming from a powerful place,
Right.
or I wasn't coming from a real place. I was just kind of awkward, and so the conversation would never go anywhere. Even if I saw a great opportunity, it was kind of like, oh, maybe I can help you, and then the conversation would sort of die. So I think those are three keys. that are really critical if as you're trying to get off the ground, or even once you're established.
Yeah.
So
I
where
think
should we begin?
yeah, well, as you share that, I almost think it might be really important to start in someone seeing their own value and being able to have a sense of that, or at least seeing where they contribute. Because even if they have, these other avenues where they can connect, if they don't have that for themselves, like you said, it can get really muddy. And it might not go anywhere. So I think that'd be a wonderful area just to start of what someone can do to begin to have a sense of their own value.
So it's a great question. So I think there are a couple of things that if you've worked with people already, I would say that's the place to start, is to really take some quiet time with your journal and reflect back to people you've worked with and the impact that it's made. Because it's so easy to think about our interactions with our clients in a very general sense. It's like, oh, I've worked with this person for 3 months or 6 months,
Right.
and so if people say like, oh, what's it like with your clients? You're like, well, we talk, and that isn't that won't let you have a visceral experience of helping them. So one of the first times I did this, I was reflecting back to a buddy of mine who I've worked with coaching a number of times over the years. Like he'll have certain inflection moments, and he'll call me, and we'll either do one session or we'll do a series of sessions. But when I reflected on it, I remember that he said almost every time we engaged, he would get a new job and he would double his salary. So
Wow.
like that was a really obvious thing. And I was like, when I thought about it, I was like, that's really cool. And that's an obvious one. It's like it's easy to track money.
Yeah.
But when I thought about it, that's very different from me just thinking like, oh yeah, we did some coaching. Like I had a specific thing that I could get in touch with, and I could think about it's not so much that he got a new job and that he made more money. It's the impact that had on his life and his sense of himself in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So looking to a number of clients and really identifying what were the moments that something new emerged. And as a coach, we're there to help them tease those things out. So we're not always prescribing solutions. In fact, most of the time we're not. We're there to be a catalyst for them to see opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I would start. Reflect on a number of your clients and the impact you had. Now, if you're new, the place you want to look is your interactions with friends, colleagues, people over the years where you've had a conversation where it had a powerful impact.
Yeah.
Because that will also get you in touch with, what, having a conversation makes a difference, and it can make a difference that has a huge impact on someone's life. And that's what you want to get a sense of. If I'm in a conversation where I'm talking about coaching, I want to come to it with a sense of excitement, like when I work with this person, we're going to expand hopefully what's possible for them in the world. And
Yeah.
when I think about that with the person sitting in front of me, then I get really excited because I'm imagining them in this expanded sort of life. And by the way, I want to be really clear. It's not necessarily about money or something like that. A lot of the people I work with, the goal is for them to feel comfortable in their own skin.
Right.
So if I see somebody being very awkward and I imagine them kind of like really just finally embodying themselves and
Mm-hmm.
breathing nicely, then I get excited, and it's something that I genuinely want to share with that person.
Yeah. I
Does
think that
that help a bit?
Yeah, I think it does. So it sounds like for those that have really worked with people before, to take some time to journal, to reflect on their experience with those people and the differences that were made, And it sounds like some of this is, you know, a bit of a nuance, especially in coaching, in the sense of sometimes we aren't always, you know, oftentimes we aren't prescribing the solution. We're asking questions that are helping bring that about in them. So sometimes there can, I think, be this element of, you know, well, they did that, not me. But I think the important part is to see that they were a part of that catalyst, like through that work and those questions. So that reflection, it sounds like, is really important for them to see, and what those big changes were. And for those starting out, from the conversations they have with family and friends and coworkers, it's this acknowledgement, it sounds like, that they're having conversations that maybe the result isn't always money, but ultimately they're helping this person make shifts and changes in their life that they probably aren't having these types of conversations otherwise with other people. Yeah. And they are important.
And I think that's a key thing. You know, as a coach, you're helping hold a space and a time for reflection. And you know, many people don't necessarily take the time to get clear on what they want, or to even just be open to wanting something else. So like, even though we may not be making the change for them, we're holding the space where that discovery can come about, hopefully. You know, one time I was down at one of my local watering holes, and I was having a beer, and a guy came in who was a regular there. And as we were sitting there, it started very kind of surface, like, hey, how's it going? Good. You know, how you been? And we were sitting there, not talking too much. And then a little while later, you know, he turned to me and he said, you know, Rob, he said, I'm just not very happy right now. And it was like the conversation just took this turn and became very real in that moment. And that moment, like, that's a coaching moment, or it's an opportunity, because it would have been easy in that moment for me to say, yeah, you know, sometimes things suck, you know, and move on, right? And very often in our life, we do move on. We move through those conversations. So when he said that, I kind of realized there was an opening. So I just tried to make space for him to share more about that, you know, and I think that's an example of what it is to kind of hold the space where somebody feels like they can begin to entertain ideas and expand. So.
Yeah. I think that's an amazing example, right? And because conversations aren't always this, like, you know, this linear thing. They're often, like you said, you know, you talked, but maybe it wasn't a lot of talking. Then all of a sudden that was an opening. And so it isn't always this, you know, I think sometimes people look for strategies of, if I say this, then they say that. And they're often, I think that's what's often taught. And so I like this idea of having an opening, or even being open to that. I think from my past experience and what I've seen with others, there can almost be this element when interacting with others, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, of maybe either, you know, someone says something, you're in a conversation, but maybe going through something personally where it feels like you yourself may be in a moment where, oh, I have a lot to learn. Who am I to necessarily coach this person? Or it can be on the other end where maybe the other person says something is going maybe not so well, and so we don't want to, you know, feel like we're gloating if something is going well in our life, right? So then we try to come back with something that is maybe relatable. And so it sounds like for you, there's really this premise of the listening and the opening. how would you describe, I guess, these different levels of conversation that, or just the different energies that are there when approaching it, or how someone you would recommend, I guess, they approach just the different energies that occur?
So
And I know I just labeled
it's an interesting question. So I'm picking the bits that I want to answer
yeah,
in a
yeah.
certain way. One thing I'll say, and what, you know, maybe we'll talk about connecting in a little bit, or usually when I'm in conversation, I just want to be available to a rich conversation and available to the person. So especially if I'm connecting with somebody, you know, as a friend or in a social situation, I'm wanting to have a rich conversation. So it's
Yeah.
not always like, even when I was in the bar that day, I wasn't there kind of trying to sit there as a coach. I was really there just having a good time, and the conversation went there,
Yeah.
and I sort of allowed that to happen. I will say that I think sometimes when people are wanting clients, they may be listening in the conversation for sort of openings to coach, something like that, and that's okay. However, I think what can happen is it's almost like if you were talking to somebody, and or like if you're talking to me and you said, "Hey Rob, you know, unfortunately I have this health thing and there seems to be an issue with my heart." And if I said to you, "Oh, I'm a heart surgeon, would you like me to do surgery right now?" You'd probably be a little bit skeptical. It's like if I was like, "Oh yeah, I do some heart surgery on the side. It's kind of my side
Yeah.
gig," you know. So I think the tricky thing is a lot of times newer coaches are sort of jumping in, and it just doesn't come off very professionally, I would say. Um, and so I've sort of learned to, you know, I am paying attention to what happens in the conversation, but my focus is on really strengthening a relationship. And I don't think that that person may be the person that will be my next client. I don't
Right.
rule it out. Very often, their friend may be my next client. Like, I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm a coach. I will share that.
Yeah.
Now, if something really obvious comes up where I feel like okay, this is in my wheelhouse, this is sort of my expertise, then I'll chat with them about that for a while, and then I might invite them to a different conversation. I might say, "Hey,
Right.
this is something that I really work on with people. Here are a couple of examples. If you want to talk about it sometime, we can do that."
Yeah.
But that's, um, I will say that's only like 10% of how I build community and how I build my practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, if we sort of shift a little bit to kind of building community, you know, for me, that's about, I like rich relationships. I love
Yeah.
conversation, right? I like connecting with interesting people. So that's sort of where my focus is. Um, and it's interesting because I test right at the mid zone between introvert and extrovert. I would say I'm like a very extroverted introvert.
Yeah.
Right. I have the classic introvert stuff that if I'm out too much, I want to regroup on my own and things like that. But part of
Yeah.
me really is curious about people and wants to meet interesting people. So I meet people and I actually keep in touch with them.
Yeah.
And I'll, you know, if I meet somebody, I'll follow up. It might be a month down the road and just check in, see how they're doing. And I'm trying to build a rich uh, dialogue between many people, and I do a lot to connect the people that I interact with as well,
Yeah.
including my clients. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I like connect them with a bunch of people, and it just becomes this group conversation, which is really rich. Um,
Yeah.
and my experiment, and I would say this is the secret sauce in a way. So listen now. My experiment is, if you connect enough, just in a real way, in a way where you're interested and you're connecting with really, really cool people, enough business kind of circles back. So
Yeah.
that's my experiment. So far, it's worked. It's not that I would go out today and get a client today, but my experiment has been, if you're connecting enough, enough business comes back.
Hmm.
And so far for me, it's worked, and for many of my clients, it's worked. Does that make sense? Or feel free to ask for more detail. Or
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's this thing that continues to cultivate and grow over time. And I really like this idea of community and having that interest in rich conversation. I think that's something that actually a lot of people crave. Um, it makes me think of really two questions. The first being, and then maybe you identify with this as a self-proclaimed introvert, um, is this element of holding these different relationships in this community. I don't necessarily know what your experience is, but I know mine in the past, it almost felt like um, there can sometimes feel like a pressure to build a community or have connections, that it's this thing that needs to be consistent or following up. And so it can almost feel like there's this element of it takes a lot of energy. And I think that's coming from the premise almost of that it needs to be a frequent communication. And it sounds like from what you're sharing, it can still be a rich relationship, even if you're communicating with that person once a month, or maybe it's less than once a month. What is your, I guess the question there is, what is your sort of premise, or what does a rich conversation and community mean to you? Like, what does that look like in a sense of how frequently you're in conversation with someone? And maybe it's not like a number there. Maybe it's just coming naturally.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think there are a couple layers to it, or which in the end looks a lot like probably how you're um, interacting with your community of friends, I would say, for
Mm-hmm.
most people. Um, I would say the only difference is that my community expands and contracts, and some people have sort of a finite set of friends, and they're not bringing in new people.
Right.
But so there's one person that I met maybe a year or two ago, and I just really liked this guy.
Yeah.
I thought he's like really interesting. He's up to a lot. We have similar interests. So with someone like him, I I'll reach out to him every couple weeks. We might end up getting together like once every 2 to 4 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll either hop on a quick call or go for a walk, have a
Yeah.
meal. But there's just so much of the conversation between us that even when we finish one conversation, like I'm already kind of teeing up the next one in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is really, in the beginning, reach out to people because you're training yourself to reach out and to speak to new people.
Mm-hmm.
You do have to train that activity a little bit, but after a while, almost everyone that I reach out to, I feel like I'm reaching out to my oldest and best friends. I mean, like recently there was a guy that I met. He rented my friend's apartment, and he and I just really bonded. We bonded over how we think about work. We bonded over food. And so while he was here, living here, we would go out every couple of weeks. We're both very busy, but we would find time. And then he moved to the West Coast, and I was walking around the other night, and I realized, like, oh my God, I haven't talked to him for a while. And so
Yeah.
there's this feeling like I've got to talk to him, and we connected briefly, but a couple times this week, because I think we both felt that we hadn't connected. So that's the feeling of the connection for me. Now, I'll tell you about one other person, which is someone that I coached, probably 15 years ago when I was first starting out as a coach.
Yeah.
And he's a great entrepreneur. So he's also very busy. I'd like to connect with him more, but it doesn't always occur to me, and we're both kind of busy. But I'll reach out to him once or twice a year, and we'll go out for a nice dinner.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of what he's working on. He's aware of what I'm working on. And that's a great cadence for us. So it sort of runs that whole range.
Yeah.
And then some people, you meet them, you might have a coffee once, and there's just not a lot there,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I really like that. It really is this, it sounds like it's this essence of having a sense of just almost like the pulse and the tempo of it's going to be an interaction with each person. It's not this one set rule of, I always need to be reaching out at these times. It's like you were saying, these things start, once it's a practice, it really starts to occur naturally of, it may be someone that you're both busy and you check in every now and again just to see how each other are doing. And another might turn into a connection every 2 to 4 weeks. And it'll be more intimate or more connected. And just making the room for that, it sounds like.
And so if somebody's a coach and they're trying to get their business off the ground, I'm going to sort of flip the dialogue a little bit.
Yeah.
I will say, like, what you want to be working, right? If you're saying you're a coach and you need to fill your practice, you want to be doing sort of the highest value activities that you can do to grow your business, right? Like, you can't just sit at home and watch YouTube videos and expect your business to grow. So I would say that connecting with people in any way you can think of is probably, if it's not the top, it's in the top 3 of the highest valued activities you can be doing to grow your business. So even if you're a little bit more on the introvert side, practice it until it becomes comfortable. And that's why I say pursue conversations that, pursue the people that you are drawn to and that you feel comfortable around and all that. What I've found with folks who are more introverted is they love connecting. They just like connecting in a different way.
Yeah.
Right. They don't want to connect at a big party. They want to connect one-on-one. So, do whatever you need to do, but do a lot of that. And then eventually you'll get to a rhythm that works. I think a good thing to shoot for is at least one solid conversation a week with somebody new or somebody where it's a really significant conversation, just as a starting point.
Yeah.
And then if you did 50 unique conversations like that over the years, your network is going to start to become very, very rich.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like that concept of the, a 1% shift a day, kind of like it adds up over a year to over 300%. And so, like those one conversations a week add up to 52. And so that's huge. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And so in terms of the, connecting and someone being open to that and the rich conversation, do you have any recommendations for them to identify those places or to get more involved in what that is? Is it just based on their own interests, or is there anything that you recommend?
You mean in terms of who do you reach out to or how do you, is
really
that what you're asking, or?
almost to put themselves in a position to have those conversations. Um, and maybe it's the people already in their circle, or do you recommend that they follow, you know, if they're interested in painting, do you recommend they go to a painting class and just see what comes of
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. And once you sort of get into this, it gets easier and easier. Definitely target the community you're interested in and that you like hanging out with. And by the way, those may be a little bit different, but I would say I would recommend that you have some natural affinity to the community you want to serve as a coach. And you may not know in the beginning, right? You may need to coach 30 or 50 people before you start to identify, okay, these are the folks that I really enjoy coaching and that I seem to have an impact with. But yeah, if you're into a particular type of business, go find those events. I mean, there are events everywhere. I haven't done that in a while, but there were a couple sites. I think Meetup definitely was one, and there are a couple event sites. And if you just mind that for a couple weeks, you'll see there are so many events. I had a buddy who just on a whim forwarded an email that he had got. He was on a CEO news thread, I think on Meetup, something like that. And so he sent me an event for it was an incubator that supports foreign businesses coming here, or like
Yeah.
non-US businesses. And so I got the email and I was like, oh, the event's today. So I went to this event and it was the coolest thing ever. Like, you know, it was like being on Shark Tank, but with these overseas startups.
Wow.
And it was like on a rooftop and there was food and there was booze. It was fantastic. So I found that organization, I found out about them and got on their newsletter. And then, you know, I think it was like once a quarter, they would run, you know, a new cohort and I would go to the event. But there's, at least in New York City, there's tons of things like that. There's so many online communities. That's a good place to start. But I would try to make an actual connection with something that you're really interested in. Another place to start is, you know, as you look at if you look at your social media or you look at your email, who's somebody that you really like that you just haven't connected with for a while? I mean, that's the place to start. It's like we all have that friend that, you know, we haven't talked to, especially since COVID. Like
Right.
so much connection was lost. So like, you know, make the effort, connect with those people, host a conversation around a particular topic and invite a half dozen people to an online thing. That's a pretty cool way of doing it also. Oh, and if you're not on it, like Lunch Club is an amazing resource where you sign up and it pairs you with random people to have a conversation with. So that's an outstanding resource. Yeah.
I'll check that one out. I haven't heard of that one yet.
Yeah, you can fill your calendar with conversations just on that.
Oh wow, that's very cool.
Yeah.
And so I really like this idea of the opening and the rich conversations. And so, you know, someone who's putting themselves out there and this is a new practice for them, what is the mindset that you recommend that they approach it with? Because it sounds like the mindset of trying to get a client, the mindset of just going to these events to try and get a client isn't the way to approach that, and it sounds like it can almost work against them. What would you say is the mindset that would be most useful for them as they start to put themselves out there to be open to those conversations? How do you recommend that they think of it?
It's a great question, because I do understand the frustration of wanting, like, you want a client now, and you know it would be great to meet somebody at a networking event and just say, I'm a coach, work with me, and have them say yes right in that
Right.
moment. But until that happens, until that
Mhm.
day, you want to practice having conversations. And I would say the mindset is, or at least the place that I would recommend people to start is, be really curious about the person in front of you and what are they up to in the world? What are
Mhm.
they trying to do? Like what is it that this person is trying to do or experience or be in the world?
Mhm.
And what, if anything, are they struggling with?
Yeah.
And having an awareness of those things may give you an opportunity to talk with that person about coaching. More often than not, it might point out an opportunity of somebody you can refer to them. You know, this was something that a buddy of mine in Japan um, really demonstrated. You know, he has a similar way of reaching out to people. And
Mhm.
one day we were talking about it, and he basically said, all my focus is just on connecting people and helping other people. But he said it always comes back around in some way. So, you know, you might recommend a class to them, or you might recommend a therapist, or you might connect them with somebody socially. And somehow people remember that, and it does
Mhm.
tend to circle back. Um, I will say, you know, it's worth taking the time to learn about selling and to learn about how to talk to people. Um, so that if somebody expresses an interest, you know where to take that conversation.
Right.
Um, and so that it isn't this awkward conversation that, you know, for me, that was a real game changer when I sort of learned how to have that conversation. Because in the past, somebody would say like, oh, you're a coach, that's amazing, like, what is that? I'm interested. But if they didn't sort of bang me over the head and try to force money in my hands, like, I was just too awkward, and I didn't know how to invite them into a conversation, or into a coaching agreement of some kind.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I think it really highlights that conversations are, in one element, they are something that is a practice and something that we have, and on the other side of that, it's actually a skill that is developed. And so if it feels funny, or it feels like maybe they're fumbling, that to see it as a practice, to see it as a skill, and building their ability to do that, that it'll eventually feel more normal, it'll feel more natural for them as a part of it.
Yeah, there's a big difference. You know, I think um, sometimes somebody says, oh, coaching sounds interesting. And so our tendency is like, oh, it's amazing. You know, you should sign up right now.
Yeah.
Right. And that's like, it's so over the top that freaks people out. So that doesn't work. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
know that. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, well, I'm not even going to mention that I'm a coach, and I'm going to be so laid back that I'm invisible. And that
Right.
doesn't work either. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's learning how to have a very genuine conversation where you say, yes, this is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And these are ways that it can impact people that are really cool and awesome. Right.
Yeah.
And if you're interested, we can talk about it, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And I'm not going to try to convince you. Like,
Right.
I always like to tell people, I'm not going to try to sell you. Um, or if I do, I'm going to tell you that I'm trying to sell you. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
It's not yeah, none of the confusion. You have me curious on the other side of that, for people that, you know, maybe they've been maybe they reach a point where they're doing this for a bit, they have clients, and maybe they'd like to um, improve either the amount of money they're making or the type of work that they're doing. What would you recommend for them to begin to either feel the value to raise their prices, or would it be to shift the types of conversations and what they're helping with? What would you recommend for someone reaching that point for themselves as they become more comfortable and they're wanting to move on to that next level for themselves?
So you're saying somebody who's been coaching for a while, they have some clients, but what, they want more clients, or they want higher paying clients, or?
So it could be more clients. It could be, well, I think more clients would come from the conversation. I think it's almost this element of either raising their rate for perhaps higher paying clients, or maybe they want to make more money. So maybe it's how to be of service to an organization or a business, which maybe that's different than those types of conversations. I'm just thinking of this concept of being of service and providing value. If there's ways that you recommend that they shift that or approach that for themselves.
So I'm hearing a couple questions there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about just kind of raising your rates first.
Sure.
We'll talk about money first.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that happens in a couple different ways. So I'll speak to how it happens naturally, and then hopefully from people hearing that, they may be able to accelerate it a little bit. Usually what happens is people have sort of a set point of what they're comfortable asking for. You know, it's like whatever that rate is, you know, it could be a certain number of dollars an hour. And it's just like you have this inherent sense of, that's what I feel comfortable asking for.
Right.
And if you ask the person like, oh, just add another, 25% on top of that, you'll see them get really uncomfortable. It's like they haven't acclimated that next number. So sometimes it's practicing inviting somebody at that other number. But what usually happens, or at least what happened with me, was, let's say I was at $100 an hour, just so we have a round number. And maybe I wanted to get to 125 or 150. That made me really uncomfortable to ask for that. But what started happening, the first thing that happened was, I had a couple clients who were like, 100, that's not enough. I'm going to pay you 150. So my clients started introducing the higher amount. And after that happened a couple of times, then I started getting acclimated to that number and realizing, oh, maybe I am worth this, because they were inviting me at that number. I had a corporate, somebody who was going to place me in a corporate setting, and they immediately just doubled the rate that, my rate at that time. So I was like, oh, I'm not just this plus 0.25, I'm actually double that. Right. And so you start getting acclimated to different numbers. But the other thing you really want to pay attention to is, instead of focusing on your number, focus on the impact you're going to have in that person's life. And if you're sure, like, I like to make sure that the impact is going to be at least 5 or 10 times whatever the financial exchange is. So, if I'm going to charge somebody, like, say, $5,000, I'm hoping that I would get them a 25 to 50 grand salary bump. Right. That's something that then I'm like, oh, that's great. I would do that deal all day. So I feel really good about that. The second part of your question, in terms of how do you serve more, is it's the same thing with an individual. It's beginning to notice, how do you impact a group of people, right? Because we impact individuals, but we also have an impact in a group, especially in a business context. And so it's really thinking about the group and thinking, what can I contribute to this group that could have an impact? And sometimes it's just like one thing that I like to do is I like connecting people. So a lot of times it's that I'm the one who will say, okay, on Friday, we're all going to meet at this bar.
Okay.
So that's something that you can do, or host it, like I said, host an online discussion, or plan a meal with a bunch of people. And I like to get curious about it. Oh, I wonder what these two people would talk about, and then bring some people together and see what happens. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and I think it brings up this element that you spoke about, where people get comfortable or get uncomfortable with the higher amount, because sometimes they're wanting to charge more, and they feel that uncomfortability, and then it starts to go into. Sometimes I've when I worked with clients, they'll say, "Oh, I'm undervaluing myself," and it almost goes into sometimes the story for them, and so I really like what you're saying about really looking at seeing the impact. Almost, it sounds like what you're sharing is the way maybe through the feeling, or to move past the feeling, is to instead of looking at ourselves, really look outside at the people, at the group, and see the impact that's being made there. It's the value isn't based on the feeling.
Yeah, I will say, this may sound a little harsh, but I think part of the way that I learned to value my service to a certain degree is sometimes people will underpay you, and or you'll have a huge impact, and they may not acknowledge it. And when that happened a couple of times, I was like, well, I'm not going to work with someone like that again. Like, I want to work with people who just really are enjoying our work together, are getting a lot of value from it, and so that sort of works out in the end. But it is hard to charge if you're not in touch with what you could contribute to that person's life, right? Because otherwise you're just asking them for free money. And
Right.
like, if somebody has a lot of guts, that's great. Like, can you give me some free money? But most people don't. But I'll tell you a funny story. When you were in class, and I don't know if you remember this, but it was probably like 4 or 5 people in class, and we were going around and saying our goals for the class. And somebody said, well, I want to work with somebody for 3 months, and I want X amount of, like, I want so many thousand for that 3 months. And I don't know if you remember this, but when it came to you, you said, well, I want a couple $1,000s, and I said for 3 months, and you said no, per month. And so your rate was like beyond what anyone else had thrown out. Now, I'm not pointing that out to make you feel shy. What happened in that moment is one of the other students said, oh, thank you, I'm going to raise my rates.
Right.
Like, so you opened a door for him to see a bigger capacity for himself. He was picking a safe number, and when he saw you go, no, I want this amount of money, then he felt empowered to ask for more, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I actually really love that, because I really love that.
That was a funny moment. Do you remember that at all?
Yeah, I recall that. Yeah, I recall just, I think I just remember them going, oh shoot, I'm gonna raise my number.
I think everyone in the room was like, okay, everyone raise your rates.
I think so. This has been, Rob, this has been amazing, and I really, really appreciate this. And I think it's, just the amount of value in this conversation alone for those listening to be able to have conversations, to see their value, and to realize that their business is made by living their life, by meeting people, by having connections, I think is a beautiful thing. And I really appreciate your sharing your experience and the stories. And I love this. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. I really enjoy it. I was going to say that you reaching out to me was a great example of the type of outreach that I'm talking about. It's like you
Yeah,
and I hadn't talked for a while, so
right.
when I saw you text, I was like, "Oh, great. We haven't talked for a while," you know. So,
Yeah. Well, thank
great.
you. Yeah.
You
Um,
got it.
and so what we'll do is for your link to your site and YouTube channel, we'll put the link in the comments. Do you have any? Well, I was going to say last words. It sounds like sounds like last lecture. But what? Yeah. Do you have any parting words for anyone listening as they're building this skill?
You know, I think the two things that I would really underscore are take the time to get in touch with when you have had an impact with somebody you're coaching or a friend or because that's what we're here for, right? You know,
Mm.
take your mind off the money and really think about impact. Think about how to move the needle with somebody. So that's the first thing. And then think about who do you want to go out and connect with genuinely and have a good time with and sort of take it from there. So
Perfect.
that's what I'm going to leave it. That's what I'm sticking to.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, this will be on the page. I'll put the links. And thank you so much, Rob.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
You got it. Bye.